This is Brian Midway from Grace Canberra, and this is a course unit that we do in Building Church Where You Are called Prophetic Movements in Christian History. This is session 5, and this is part 2 of that session. We're planning these on the YouTube to give people access, and so we're going to do it in 3 or 4 segments. I want to talk to you now about the second of 2 major precipitators of the Reformation. John Wesley had a great, what do you call it? He had a great sense of the perspective of history, and he put that together in a doctrine which isn't actually represented so much in its terms, in the actual terms in the Bible, but it was called prevenient grace. Prevenient grace. And what that meant was, to put it roughly, God was doing a lot of things before I got here, and He's going to do a number of things afterwards. And so, if I ever think that the whole deal revolves around me, I've just totally lost it. Because if I don't have the perspective of fitting in with what God's been doing up until now, and then planning for what God's going to do after that, then I'll actually lose the opportunity to commit to God's plan. I'll be fulfilling my own plan. This is where Jesus talks about Abraham. Says, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. And so, one day Abraham ran into the tent and said to Sarah, "Listen, Sarah, I've seen the Messiah. I've seen it." She said, "Where have you seen him? Is he coming over there?" No, I've seen it. It's a few thousand years away. She said, "Oh, what's that all about?" "No," he said, "this is exactly the reason why I'm alive. I'm alive, and I'm some part of a line, and that line is going to include one day the Messiah is going to come, the Son of God's going to come." And Jesus said, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. He actually got joy out of fitting in with that plan. Well, the same thing is true with the Reformation, and the same thing is true with whatever it is that God might want to do in your sphere. Don't you think that the moment you think, oh, well, God's got a purpose to fulfill, and I'm going to do it, and all that kind of stuff, think, no, God is already working there. He's been working there for a long time. What you need to do is to get on board what God has already been doing. And that's why, in many ways, when you go to plant a church in a community sphere, you need to go figure out what God's been doing there beforehand. In the sphere itself, go do some research, Figure out what legacies, what heritage, what has been put inside there, because you can go dig the wells of previous revivals, of previous works of God. And so the Reformation was such a time. When Luther showed up on the scene, there were some very significant people who had paved the way for him. And he helped to precipitate something that they began. I wouldn't say he finished it. He certainly was a journeyman along the way, and so it is, Just think about your sphere, your household sphere, neighbourhood sphere, work sphere, community sphere, whatever sphere it is you happen to be in. Just think about that sphere and think about the God of heaven and earth who's had a plan and a purpose for a long time before this, and here you are. So you need to know where to pick the story up, how to carry it forward, and leave it there and sow into a situation so that God can do it. Now, I want to talk to you about Jan Hus. Now, we talked about John Wycliffe. The second one was Jan Hus. They talk about him as Hus in the Czech language means goose. So we used to make a lot of, it'd be like me being called Brian Goose. And so, he used to make a lot of jokes about that. He was a peasant, and we're now moving from England, Oxford in England, across to the Czech Republic, or where the Czech Republic is now. And Hus, from whom the term came, the Hussites, and they were, precipitators of a long line of what became known as the Bohemian Brethren and all that kind of stuff. So, a lot of things going on. And Hus was a preacher. He was a peasant guy. As he began to study, this is what I love. He began to study. As he studied, his zeal increased. He wasn't just filling up a space. He was actually searching up something. His zeal increased. He began his ministry preaching in the common language. Very important. He believed that the Bible should be preached in the common language. And I'm going to tell you, when Bible truth gets loose into, the environment wherever you are. See, you need to represent Bible truth, because this Bible truth, no matter how you interpret it, how you represent it, how you give expression to it, Bible truth has life. It has power about it. And the way that the enemy has tried to stop his purposes coming is to denigrate, cut it out, make it impossible. And so the Bible used to be preached in many places in Latin. They used to do the preaching in Latin. Nobody understood Latin except, a few people. So he then began to see a whole bunch of things that were going on, including indulgences, including, the clergy. Because in those days, the bishops used to tender for their parishes, and they'd pay the Pope so much to be made an archbishop. And the archbishop in one of the places where Huss was a military guy, looked for a bit of a lucrative career after the military, and he began to become archbishop, and he paid a good deal of money for it, so he then got his money by selling indulgences and all that sort of stuff. Well, a lot of the priests just lived a very affluent and horribly immoral lives, and was just horrible. They used to drink too much and be sexually immoral, all this kind of stuff. And so Huss began to preach about this. He began to reach out and say, no, this mustn't be so. And he began to make some enemies, and then he was asked to appear before a council, and then they invited him, the Pope invited him to a council. He refused to come, and then he finally came. People told him not to come, but he came anyway. They said they would give him safe passage. They didn't give him safe passage. He was actually burned at the stake, and he was tried in a monkey trial, or not a monkey trial, but a kangaroo court. I knew it had something to do with animals, and so there he was. So here were the four things that Huss represented. The first one was that the Word of God should be preached freely. It should be heard freely. The second one was that the sacrament should be given in both kinds, not just one kind. Third one was the priests should relinquish earthly possessions and live according to the model of Christ, not these horrible, indulgent lives. And the fourth was that all sins are to be, that are publicly known, are to be publicly condemned. And he just saw all the sins going on in the church. Well, he lit a fire. Thousands of people flocked to hear him. He used to preach in such a way that people loved to hear him, especially the ordinary people. And so after he was killed, there was this huge uprising. There was actually a war that went on for some period of time, unfortunately. But Huss stood, and you should have heard some of the things. If you read the notes there, you'll hear all the things that he said. And he was a man who heard God speak about what was going on around him, and was fearless in his representation of values and principles that were the honour of God. Now, he lit a fire, and Luther fanned the flames of that fire, and today we have half the church that represents the result of the Reformation and the idea of somebody belonging to Jesus by faith and the Word of God and all that kind of stuff. So, great stuff. Talk to you later.